179, let's see what you got.
Welcome to a very normal therapeutics employee training video. In this video, we'll talk about the one sample t-test. We'll talk about what it is, why it's important, and we'll see how to implement it in code.
You got the saws, you got drawing criteria.
Christian,
draw a couch, draw
student
20
of
couches,
statistics.
make it a timed
The
event.
goal of this channel is to make
every time you draw a couch with that same rough average,
so that you can better apply it to your career or daily life and stay informed. If my voice sounds different to you, I'm just feeling a little under the weather, so I'm sorry if that affects the voiceover a little bit too much. These are the main concepts and ideas that I'll discuss in this video.
Mathematics
At the end, I'll create a network of these ideas to show you how I think about them, and let you develop your own intuition. One of the main reasons that statistics is useful is that it lets us make data-driven decisions. Instead of just going with our gut, listening to the highest paid person's opinion, or just listening to some random dude on the internet, we can let the data guide our decisions instead. Data actually gives us a better sense of how the world actually works. One of the main ways that statisticians make data-driven decisions is through hypothesis tests. There's no shortage of criticism of frequentist hypothesis
Obviously
tests.
not hydrogen out
and
there.
as someone who
It
leads
is,
Evasion,
but we don't
I get a little bit
that,
of nausea every time I do one. But the reality is that hypothesis tests are still important to know and understand. There are many types of hypothesis tests,
That's the
but we'll start
hypothesis
with the humble
theory
one-sample t-test.
and
Many of the concepts we'll learn here will apply to essentially all
0, 1,
hypothesis
and 2,
tests.
right?
So we'll start to develop our own intuition
if a number
by
1
using the
isn't good
simplest
enough,
version
it's
of
0.
one.
If a number
Let's
2
buckle in and
isn't
get
good
started
enough,
with
it's
the training.
0.
Before we can understand the phrase
On the range
one
of
sample,
fractalization
we
of
have to
that,
understand
you get
what a
into these
population
time
is.
sequences.
In
Like, well,
statistics,
if 2 is
the
not
word
enough, how
population
long would
has
it
a very
take me,
specific
given
meaning.
1
It is a
or
group of
0,
items
2,
with
1,
similar
to
qualities
compensate
that we're
that difference,
interested in
and there's a
studying.
time sequence
One
there.
example of a
And if you know that
population
time
is the
sequence,
set of all people who
it
consume
says,
YouTube
well,
content.
that's what the
Another
operation
example
needs
is
to
the
be.
population
Is there
of
any
all
other hidden
patients
variable
diagnosed with
inside
type
of
2
that
diabetes.
needs to be
Populations don't have to be
compensated
human,
for?
but as a pharma company, humans are usually who we study. These two examples are distinct, but share something in common. You would agree
One of
with
the bigger
me that
problems
if we wanted
is
to study these
I'll usually
populations,
take this
it would
stuff
be pretty hard,
home,
if
and
not
if I'm
impossible,
going to a
to
mill
gather
or something,
data
or if
from everyone in
I'm,
these
just cutting
populations.
grass
By
outside the front
extension,
yard,
we won't be able to
usually
learn
upstairs,
characteristics
when
or
you're riding around
qualities
on the mower,
about
at
this
least me
population.
anyways,
Instead, we collect
usually
data
got
from
stuff
a
like
small
this going
subset of
down.
the population, which we call a sample.
I'm not 18 anymore,
Intuitively,
man.
if we can learn something from the smaller sample, then what we learned shouldn't be too far off from the population they come from.
I was wondering why that landscaper was
connection,
losing all that
and this
time.
is the task of
Makes sense
statistical
now.
inference.
Not a
Therefore,
portion that field's
one
thinking
sample
about right now,
problems
other
are
than the farmer's
problems where
talk.
we're interested in a single population,
How long?
and by extension, one sample. With one sample problems, we're usually trying to research about a specific quality about the population.
Wow.
For the YouTube
Well,
population,
that's the
you might
crux
be
in
interested
salting
in
old
the average
bones,
amount
isn't
of
it?
time they watch YouTube in one day.
Oh, you can't
For
tell
the
them apart, I
population of
hat and
diabetes,
J hat,
you
0
may
or
be
1,
interested in the
because
proportion
it's
of them who
relative.
have a particular comorbidity,
But in
like
general, they
obesity
do
or
serve
high
a
blood
little bit of
pressure.
a
Before we go
hypothesis
further, let's define some
influence
notation.
on
What
here's
we're
a
interested in
time,
is the
here's a
population
hypothesis,
mean,
here's a
which we'll
time.
denote as mu.
There's not really a
Won't be able to
difference between
calculate
them,
this directly,
except for
but
in
this notation
the
lets us
equation,
represent
the
this
linear
idea.
progression of that
Instead,
equation.
we use the
I
sample
can't
mean
have
as an
it
estimator or
be
guess
the same
of the
thing in the same
population
place.
mean.
So you'll see
We
a
can
lot of
actually
math
calculate the
equations in
sample
there
mean
that's got
because we gather data from
multiple
the
double
sample.
derivatives.
We assume that
A derivative is a
populations
little
have some
different
degree of
because
randomness
I
to
need to
them.
know in a
And
long
as a
series
result,
of events,
there could be a wide range
say
of values
2,
that the sample could take. By virtue
second
of the
order,
data itself
that'll
being
happen.
random.
There will
We'll
be
start by learning a
clock in
high-level
time,
overview
set up
of the method
stations
we'll
of
be using to
everybody
make
in the
data-driven
everybody in the
decisions.
stone mill
After
or
introducing this
landscaping crew.
method, we'll dive into how
And the
the
second part of that is
specific
each of
details
them
the
run their
one-sample
operation
t-test
with a
apply
timed
to this
event.
method. The
And that
method
is
we'll be
if
learning
we're
is called
consistent
the
on that day. 2
null
days we're going to
hypothesis
be the
significance
same
testing
2
framework,
jobs
which we'll just abbreviate
to model that.
NHST.
Now, if it was
This
a
method
third
was
or
invented
there
by
was a
Sir
different,
Ronald Fisher,
it's still the same
one of the
thing.
most
I'm still using this
prominent and
influence on
controversial
time
figures in
dilation.
statistics. In this context, a hypothesis is a
Yeah,
statement
well.
that the world or population is a certain way. To be more precise, a hypothesis
America's
is a
pretty
statement
Catholic
about the
with Judeo.
specific
So
value
when
that
I
a
want to talk
population
about
parameter
religious
takes.
aspects, I
For
take that
example, we
calculation
believe that the
and I
average
use
video
the
watch
probability,
time of someone
right?
who watches YouTube
Most
is
people are
50
going to be
minutes.
here. When you see
Then we
somebody of
translate this
Middle
into
East
a
descent,
hypothesis about the
you're
population
probably going to
mean
go
being
Shiite
equal to
or
50.
Muslim with it.
Statistical
So make sure
hypotheses can
you're
be about
putting
any
the
population
point
level
between
parameter,
the two on
including the
eschatology.
variance.
If there
But for
was
this
a
video,
common border
we'll focus
between
on the
each
mean.
other
Like
or
its name suggests,
a
this
time
framework
when they were both
present
working
something
together, then
called
that's
the null
probably the
hypothesis,
highest
which we
probability to
usually
cause
denote
the
as
least
H
amount of
naught.
friction.
The null hypothesis can be thought of as the hypothesis that depicts the status quo, or
I just prefer it for
something that
null.
we'd like to disprove. In the
You know,
context of a one
you got to know the story about Anunnakis and stuff about null for this one, but it's the gold machine. It's you got a gold mine running in town and village. There's the time sequence and the hypothesis. Somebody hits a new gold mine and it completely tilts the town and causes droughts and all kinds of problems. Not because that would naturally happen. We're gonna have to find a new gold mine at some point. But if you do it when
also have a probability
you have that type of
function.
balanced system, it'll throw it out of balance.
First assume that the null hypothesis
it's not necessarily
is
a problem,
this
but
assumption will decide the
back to the
probability
original, it's just
distribution
within the
of
operator
test
for you
statistic.
there, or force
Together,
time.
we call it the null distribution.
Yeah.
The distribution
So the
of
null
the
is
test
ft, not
under the
fx.
null
But
hypothesis.
it doesn't much
And here's
matter
the
because
key
x
idea.
could be a time.
Remember that a probability density function tells us what values are likely
Well, that's
and
on you to
unlikely
decide.
for a given
If
random
we're
variable.
doing round
After
robin
we calculate our
systems,
statistic,
and
we'll see
I
where it
knew
falls
out
within
front
this null
that
distribution.
fx was
If our
better
test statistic looks unlikely in the null
because you've seen it more than you've
implies that our
applied
original
ft.
assumption that the null
T is going to be
hypothesis
this
was true
line. X is this
questionable,
line.
and that we
Right?
should reject
When I'm
it.
talking about
And we'll see
height off of the
exactly how
cannon,
we judge a
the
test
projectile
statistic
momentum
to be
equation at
likely
sine
or
30
unlikely
given
later
phi
in the
30.
video. That's a lot of ground we covered
Anyways,
there, but here are the essential ingredients that we need to keep track of.
once you remember that one, by the way,
Population parameter,
you remember it's
null
always sine
hypothesis,
30
test
and
statistic that
phi
comes from
something
actual
else on
data,
a practice
and the null
trajectory
distribution of the
momentum
statistic.
trajectory
We'll use the
equation
YouTube
because
population as a
you'll
running
never forget
example
it.
for this
All the
video.
students will
In this
remember
case,
it, and
our
when they want to set up
population parameter of
a
interest is
frame
the
for a
average
trajectory
watch
or
time.
something
I came
like
across
this,
an interesting graph about YouTube
you just
watch
call it
time
that.
a while
You
ago.
just sine
This
30,
analysis
phi
found
30,
that people
25,
watch
20, whatever
YouTube
it is.
for
I
an
don't
average
remember.
of
Pick one,
48.7
map it.
minutes
That gets your
in
angles and
2024.
your
This
stuff
is
right.
amazing to me because we haven't even started 2024 yet, and yet they already know what's happened.
Yeah.
So let's
You
collect
got
some data
a
and
discrete
see if their analysis
distribution,
holds some water.
and usually a
Because
pay
we're still in
is what that is. You're
2023,
taking the
we'll
whole
use
pie
their
chart
estimate from this year
out of
and
weekly
use
or
it as our
monthlies,
null
and you're averaging
hypothesis.
it. So that's another
Explicitly,
good one.
our null
Feynman,
hypothesis
yeah.
is that the average watch time a person watches
It's,
YouTube
two sticks.
is
Get a diagram.
47.5 minutes. Since we have the population parameter and the null hypothesis, we need to figure out a good test statistic and its null distribution. We've already mentioned that the sample mean, x bar, is a good guess for the population mean, so why don't we go with that? Hypothesis
Technically,
tests
I'm here
don't
for
always
me.
use estimators
Much
as
I
the
like helping
test
everybody else,
statistic,
but
this is what the
I'm
one
here for
sample
me,
t-test
so
uses.
I can equate this.
The last
Well, there's
ingredient
no
we
point
need
in me
is the
listening to
sampling
this guy
distribution
pound
of the
off
sample
like
mean.
it's a.
Since we
I
needed to
like it
figure out
because
the null
it's not the
distribution,
news. It's the
thanks
same
to
thing that
central
the
limit
news is,
theorem,
but at least it's
if we
true.
collect a lot of data,
I mean,
then
it's
the
not
distribution
true,
of the sample
little
mean will
data,
be
little
approximately
delta.
normal, where
But
its mean is
the
population
timeline
mean,
that you're going to put
and its
over is a
variance is
number
the
I could never
population
know.
variance divided
And that's
by the sample
true,
size. For the
but
purposes of this video, we'll assume that all the assumptions of central limit theorem are valid. But if you need a refresher, you can refer back to the normal distribution
and then
training
a little
video.
delta. That might
Instead
be
of
something
working
different,
with
but it
this
doesn't
form
matter.
of the distribution,
Could be like
statisticians
little omega
prefer
or
to work
something.
with the standardized distribution
Omega
instead. To
being
make sure that the test
time.
statistic has a standard normal distribution, we first subtract by the sample mean and divide this by the population standard
Because
deviation.
when you're thinking about, when you
Call
see
this new
this time,
standardized
well,
statistic
when you
Z,
see 1 over
or a
0,
Z statistic.
we know that
We've
a
taken the
pallet of
statistics
packs
course
is
before,
1.
and you may recognize that these
I
ingredients together
needed
form the Z
5
test.
of them.
The
What I don't
hypothesis
have
test
is
for the
that inverse
population
to that
mean based on the
equation
Z
where
statistic.
time,
But the Z
I have
test has a
6
glaring
hours. I
problem.
can get 2 packs in
see it?
there, and that is over an amount of time that I need it to be. So, and that's a little delta. We're going to always assume for reasons of inflation, if I give a master mason a delta, a little delta is number based, they'll get done and done with approximation. Or, yeah.